There is no video recording of any of the panels at the Expo this weekend, so please, please, please don't video it. Otherwise, one of the lovely people in orange will just stare at you and take your camera away. And Bob can be quite intimidating, believe me. Right, so just going to find our guests and we're going to bring them out.
This is a public announcement for fans of Mark Lester and Ron Moody. If you'd like to get their autograph, you need to make your way to the signing area as they will be leaving shortly. That's fans of Mark Lester and Ron Moody. So make your way to the signing area as they will be leaving shortly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage our two guests for this panel this afternoon. Please give a massive round of applause in a few seconds.
This is a public announcement. Anybody who has a ticket to watch the cosplay masquerade, please will you make sure that at 4:15 p.m. you go to Hall N1 to begin queuing. That's anyone with a ticket for the cosplay audience to queue from 4:15 in Hall N1. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the series Caprica that's currently on the Sci-Fi Channel. Please give a massive round of applause to one of the creators behind the series and behind the reinvention of Battlestar Galactica universe, Mr. Ronald D. Moore, ladies and gentlemen. And please give, from Caprica, a massive round of applause to Esai Morales. Esai Morales, I apologize. So welcome, guys, welcome to London. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
So, Ron, simply start with you. Following on from Battlestar Galactica, what made you decide to want to develop Caprica?
Well, the development of Caprica came sort of in a roundabout fashion. David Icke, who produced Battlestar Galactica with me, David and I had sort of talked very casually about the idea of doing a spin-off series of Galactica, but we hadn't really focused on what it would be or what kind of show, except we knew that we didn't want to do another war show and we didn't want to do another Battlestar show. And we said if we did anything, it would probably be about the creation of the Cylons. And then on a completely separate track, a writer named Rami Aubuchon came to Universal Studios and pitched them an idea for a show about the development of artificial intelligence. And Universal said, why don't you sit down with David and Ron, because they're sort of talking in the same general arena about a spin-off to Galactica. The three of us sat down together, got along very well, and essentially it was out of those discussions that came the idea to do Caprica.
And when you first developed the idea, did you have a cast in mind, or was it something that you developed over time, or how did you come to settle on Esai, for example?
We didn't really have a specific cast in mind for Caprica. We just sort of, we had gotten very lucky on the Battlestar cast, and we just decided, okay, let's go out and do the same methodology and see if we can gather a good cast for Caprica. And we did. We got an excellent ensemble and a tremendous cast, including my friend Esai here. And I think the cast is really carrying the show so far.
And Esai, how did you hear about the role of Joseph Adama?
My agent. By the way, can you guys hear us? Everybody, you're good back there? Okay, good. Because I can't, but I'm like lip reading a bit. An agent said there's a great show that's from the people who brought us Battlestar, and Battlestar is great pedigree, and so we I read the script, I read the scenes anyway, and they were smart, intelligent, feeling, a lot of compassion in the scenes, in the few scenes that I had auditioned with. And I was quite surprised because unfortunately a lot of the media today is somewhat backwards. It's like the stupider you are, the crazier you are, the more extreme you are, the more attention you get. So reality television has taken quite a toll on scripted programming. So our job opportunities are less and less. And when this show came up, it was a godsend.
And the character of Joseph Adama, this is aimed at the both of you really. Ron, it's kind of a less romanticized version than what we saw in actually Battlestar. What made you decide to do that? And similarly on another tack for you, Esai, what made you decide to actually, how fun is it or how much a challenge it is to you to play the dark and the light sides of the character that we seem to be seeing?
I'm not sure I understood. I could quite hear the question. The question was...
On Battlestar we see, and Caprica, the difference is we see a less romanticized version of Joseph in this one.
Oh.
How deliberate was that when you first started the series, and what was it like for you to play them, Esai, in that respect?
Well, we started out with the idea that we wanted to sort of build a different character of Joseph and his son, and sort of to not simply go with what the audience already knew that had been referenced in the Battlestar mythology about the way William Adama grew up and sort of that his father was a civil liberties attorney. And we thought it was more interesting to sort of show how his father would have gotten to that place eventually, and that the circumstances where the family that William grew up in was different than what the audience expected. And it just felt like it gave us a little bit more freedom and a little more interesting journey, to lie ahead.
Also in real life, memories are much more romanticized than the reality. So, we don't want to play the romanticized mythology. We kind of want to play the more realistic aspects, and it's a lot more to tune in for as opposed to what you already have heard. So, one of my favorite quotes is, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans," by a famous Brit named John Lennon. And I guess this show reflects that. It shouldn't be a show that says, okay, we're going right to what you know as Battlestar. It should be a show that has so much else, and you go, how are they ever going to get to that? So that you're more interested, as opposed to being able to predict it.
And Joseph's he has a very unique mixture of being light and dark, a good and evil side to him. What's it like for you as an actor to play both sides of the character?
Haha. It's wonderful, really. I mean, one of the trappings of getting typecast in either way is, playing the bad guy. For years, I, played the bad guy. Then when you play the good guy, they seem less interesting. People like the bad guy because you can get away with things that you inhibit in your own real life. But the reality is that most of the things that we do in everyday lives, we have to make choices, and oftentimes they're right down the middle. We're not good or bad people. We're people that make good and bad choices. So he's trying to be a good man. It's interesting. I see Daniel Greystone. If you want to, break it up, he's kind of like not so good a guy that has a great image, and I'm a good guy that's trying to be bad in a sense. He's trying to be badder because to survive as a Tauron, trying to be Caprican isn't working. So he has to go back in a sense. It's a bad guy who tries to be good and a good guy who tries to be bad kind of situation. Whatever.
And it must be incredible to have a chance to play that, though, on a daily basis.
It's rich. It's a full character as opposed to somebody who's neatly defined all the time. It's wonderful. And I have to say that the beginning, what you've already seen, has been wonderful to make, but the next half takes off, and I can't wait till Sci-Fi puts that out, because the first half, in my opinion, as an actor, and the show is finding itself. And the second half, I think it takes off even more so. We put hooks in you that we were going to rip out, and that's as far as I can say.
Sounds good to me. Now, if you have a question for either of our panelists, please stick your hand up, and we will ask them too. We'll start off down the front here.
Hi guys. You mentioned already about second half of the first season. If you hopefully get renewed for several seasons, what's the sort of story arc that you're expecting? Are we going to see any of the Cylon War?
You're asking about the second half of the season?
Well,
I'm sorry. It's a little hard up here. If we get picked up, where do we go? We do have sort of a general idea of where the second season would take us, but we only have sort of a basic jumping off point. The end of the first season ends with our traditional several cliffhangers and a lot of twists and turns and surprises about what happened to certain characters. So the beginning of the second season was really going to pick up naturally from that cliffhanger and sort of move forward. We have a general idea that the second season will probably be a little bit faster paced, probably a little bit more action going along, but still sort of rapidly developing a lot of the major mythology that we've established in the first season.
Also, I have to say, when I read the final episode of the first season, I'm not ashamed to admit, I wept openly. I couldn't, it was so moving. What happens to our family, to our characters, to the dynamic is mind-boggling. And I had to literally go to sleep, because you don't want to waste it at home. You want to save it for the day.
Okay, and we have a question from a lady here.
Hi there. Obviously on Battlestar there was a great sense of unity between the cast and that. Do you find that similar with Caprica, or is it a little bit less or more, or what?
Are you asking myself or Ron?
Well, both of you. For Ron, do you see that it's more so like unity for Battlestar, that all the cast are joining together and working well as a team, or is that more on Caprica for you? Do you find that everyone's working well together?
I think that Battlestar's unity has developed through the years, through its success and what they went through. I think Caprica, we're still... there are pockets of us that have time to spend time together, that have that ability. Others have families, and they have to tend to their families. So I don't think we're as cohesive as we will be if you guys demand 2 or 3 more seasons.
I somehow don't think there's going to be a problem with that one. I really don't. Right, I have a question for this gentleman here.
Hi guys. Question for both of you, but particularly for Ron, having worked on BSG. There were some quite serious storylines in BSG with the whole political, terrorist, the economic stuff going on the ship. All the storylines were quite serious. Did you ever have any problems from the network telling you what you could and couldn't do? And are you seeing any of that on Caprica?
It's very, very difficult because there's a loud noise.
His question was, did you get any pressures from the network? You obviously may have had, because of the storylines on BSG, some pressure from the networks about what you could and couldn't do. Have you had any pressure from that when you came to do Caprica?
Oh, did we get pressure from the networks on Battlestar, and did we get a similar pressure from the okay.
Due to the serious storylines.
The arguments that I would get into with the network on Battlestar and Caprica really didn't have much to do with the storylines themselves. I don't think I ever had a philosophical argument with the network about, what the storyline was about, the politics or the religion that was in the show. The things that you would argue about with the network were what I think were more silly things, like how much blood you could show in a scene, how much sexuality in a scene, how dark is this particular episode, kind of nonsense like that. And you would debate literally, well, does he get one leg blown off or 2 legs blown off in the scene, because somehow that's, of concern. Or, famously in Battlestar, I did a scene where I killed like 20 pilots I'd written to kill 20 pilots in an episode where a drone went off accidentally on the hangar deck and killed a lot of pilots in the beginning of the show. And the argument from the network was about, well, does it have to be 20? Can it be 12? and it was like somehow that makes it okay if it's 12 for you, and it can't be 20 because that's like too gross, and it's, you know, you get those kinds of arguments. But I really didn't have a lot of pressure or arguments with the network on Caprica just in terms of the content of the show. It was all about, you know, the graphic nature of it, how much sex are we going to show, how much drug use, you know, it was that kind of stuff.
They wanted to limit it?
Yeah, they wanted to limit it.
All right, I have a question from a young man here.
Hi, this question, it follows on from the previous question. In Caprica, there was a scene where Cylon had to make a decision about shooting a dog. Well, I love dogs, and I was quite shocked. I knew it was all fiction and all of that, but what was your decision on that scene?
About the killing of the dog. What was your position?
About the killing of the dog? Oh, the killing of the dog? You talking about the dog thing?
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted her to have shot it. I wanted her to have really shot that dog. I thought that would have, but you know, mine was a very solo voice. Oh, you loved dog? I know. We wouldn't have actually shot the dog, but you know.
We have a question from a young lady here.
On Caprica, there's a very much a 1930s, 1940s aesthetic. Why did you pick that era to sort of portray Caprica as?
Well, as we were approaching Caprica, you know, one of the big things that you had to be concerned about was the fact this is a prequel. This is a show that takes place in the past of Galactica. And how did we want to visually represent that? And I started advocating early on that we think of Caprica as a period piece, that, you know, it's taking place in another time from Battlestar. So while we wanted it to feel very much like a contemporary society, I wanted to always have sort of a reminder to the audience that this is a period piece, this is taking place in Battlestar's past. So we started talking about there being a certain 1940s, 1950s aesthetic that you would see with men in fedoras, long coats, ties, women's fashions would be a little bit behind, a little retro, and just art direction overall. And also throughout the show, you'll see there's a mix of technology. You'll see phones with hand cords, you'll see cell phones, you see the computer sheets that are very advanced, and you'll see, you know, like in GDD, they have old school 3/4 inch tape, and they've got the computer screens still with the amber displays on it. And I liked this sort of mixture of the technologies and sort of reminding the audience constantly that this is not the distant future, it's actually sort of the distant past.
And the concept that societies repeat themselves again and again with varying degrees. I love it because it's an aesthetic that appeals to many people. I mean, if you look outside, there's all sorts of, you know, anime, high-tech, modern, old in our own society, so I think that reflects something we can identify with. Chris, did you have something to say?
We have a question from Chris.
Hi, I've got a question for you, Esai. Did you speak with James Edward Olmos about the role that you were going to take on? And because you seem to very convincingly play his father, I wondered if you'd spoken to him about the role.
Well, it's interesting because I asked Ron and David and the creators, I said, how much should I speak to Edward James? And, you know, how much do you want me to channel him per se? And they said, you don't have to, which is liberating for an actor because you want to avoid caricature, you want to avoid, you know, imitation, impersonations. But I spoke to Edward James at an award show after he saw the pilot, and he said, "You're about to embark on an amazing journey." And he's, you know, that gravitas in his voice. Because you're going to have an amazing journey. And it's true. He was right.
And we have a question also from the front.
It's two questions, really. The first is, have you spoken to Edward James Olmos about maybe directing an episode of Caprica? Is there anything maybe in there? And secondly, will we see any more of the other colonies in Caprica?
We did talk to Eddie about directing. It didn't work out for scheduling reasons because Eddie is very busy, and you know the slots on Caprica are very specific, and you have to be available for these weeks at this time, and we couldn't work that out in year one. And as for the other colonies, you will definitely see some of the other colonies. In fact, in the second half of the season, you will definitely see at least Geminon.
We have a question from a young lady here.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Moore. There were rumors circulating on the internet that you're planning of another spin-off from Battlestar Galactica, and I wonder if that's true. And can you share?
Hold on, slow down a little bit because it's a little murky. What did you see that you thought I said?
There were rumors in the internet.
Oh, another spin-off? Okay, sorry. And keep
of
going.
another spin-off, not Caprica, but another one to Battlestar Galactica, and I wonder if that's true. And can you share what the idea is all about?
It's sort of true in that there are discussions going on with Universal and us about doing another sort of project in the Battlestar universe, but there's really nothing definitive yet, and there's several options that are sort of on the table under discussion, so I can't even sort of give you a general direction. All I can say is that they are true to the extent that we're having those discussions, but nothing's been approved, nothing's sort of been firmed up yet.
And we've mentioned about the visual style on the show. How long does it kind of take to put all of that together on the production side, Ron, and then Esai on the other side? What's it like to actually film an episode where you're wearing all that nice, the sharp suits, the fedoras and everything like that? How does that add to the experience for you?
Well, it takes a while to nail all these things down, except it never feels like you have enough time in television. You've got to, the best time is, before the show actually starts shooting. You've got a couple of months usually in prep to sort of start, making key decisions on what you're going to do for the series. But the truth is, most of the creative decisions are made in the week or two just before we shoot an episode. And when the director comes on and starts his formal prep, 7 days before the beginning of principal photography, and he's working intensely with the art department, costumes, visual effects, everybody to sort of bring the look and feel of that episode together. And as you can see by looking at the series, these are very complex. We're going to the virtual world, we're doing a lot of green screen stuff, we're shooting a lot on location, we've got interiors, there's lots of change of wardrobe, and a lot of these decisions are made very quickly on the fly, and it's just a lot of people, it's an entire production of a couple hundred people just scrambling constantly to sort of pull these things together.
For me, it's wonderful. I mean, the suit just, it's part of the character. It helps me. The hat, especially. The hat just was the the finishing touch. It just reminded me of my own father. I remember seeing a picture of my dad with one of those hats, and it immediately transports you back to a time, a fatherly time, a fatherly feel, and I've not announced this publicly, and I might just say I'm going to become a father for the first time. So you heard it first publicly.
Well, I can congratulations.
Thank you.
And we've got another question here.
Hi, I'm just wondering, in your new series, are there going to be any new characters appearing, and are there any vacancies as well? Because I am a great actor.
Oh, well, leave your name at the door, and there will. You're talking about if there's a new spin-off series. I assume, yeah. If we do a spin-off project, it'll probably be loaded with new characters, and there's also the possibility to use existing characters. And like I said, it's really kind of a vague project right now.
And from the look of his cosplay, he's got no problems in any kind of whatever you want him to wear. Right. Okay, we have a gentleman here.
Sorry, going on to the back of that slightly. In later seasons, do you intend to bring any old characters back? So, for example, Baltar's a young father, or, obviously there's the 50 years gap between them. So any, people's parents, a storyline there?
We sort of said from the outset that we didn't really want to do very much of that. We wanted to keep that to a bare minimum, that we have the Adamas and we have the evolution of the Cylons. And I think you'll get tired of it really quickly if we start introducing everyone's parents, grandparents, etc. Which is not to say that we'll never do it, but we're sort of trying to keep that at arm's length at the moment.
I have a question just over here.
This is a question for Ron. I think you worked on some of the later Star Trek episode series, and also in recent years, Star Wars, Star Trek have gone down the prequel route as well. Is there anything from your experience or looking at those projects that kind of shaped your vision on how to build an extended world?
Is there anything that shaped my experience?
In building building the prequel for Battlestar Caprica.
Oh,
like how to extend that world to make it kind of feel wholesome and true.
From my experience at Star Trek, was there anything that's particularly influenced Battlestar?
Yeah.
Right. Mostly the experience at Deep Space Nine. When I was at Deep Space, and I did that for 5 years. Towards the end of their run, we started doing the Dominion War arc. And a lot of the discussions in the writer's room revolved around our frustration of what we could and could not do at Trek in a war show. And I kept feeling like, you couldn't really get under the skin of the characters, and you could only go so far in the Star Trek universe to sort of portray, a science fiction war and what it would do to people, and what are the costs, and, what does it do psychologically to people, and what would those situations really be like. And so when I approached Battlestar, there was sort of a lot of pent-up ideas and a lot of sort of notions of what I could do if I had free reign to do whatever I wanted, and suddenly I could do whatever I wanted. So that was very formative in sort of how Battlestar came about.
I have a question for this young man here.
Hi again. I had the fortune of watching the UN panel that Eddie Olmos and Mary McDonald took part in. I was just curious, how did that come about? I mean, how did that panel at the UN come about?
How did what come about?
You have to be more clear.
The UN panel with Eddie Olmos
and
Mary
United
McDonald.
Nations panel. I'm sorry. It came about because, as I recall, there were representatives from the United Nations who were big fans of the show, and Sci-Fi Channel in New York. They encountered each other, or they knew each other through some means, or some kind of outreach or something. But the Secretary General of the United Nations was making an effort to reach out to the creative community as part of fulfilling the UN's mandate and reaching out and trying to make people understand more fully what the United Nations mission was. And somewhere in that sort of casual conversations between them, this idea of, well, there's Battlestar Galactica, and it deals with, a lot of the issues that you're dealing with terrorism and with, humanitarian problems and refugees and so on, and maybe there's an opportunity to do an event between the two, and it just sort of grew from there.
And how, for you, Ron, does that feel to know that your series has had such an impact on that, in sense, in the not only on the pop culture side of things, but also on that political scale, that people like that show and what it stands for?
Oh, it's kind of astonishing. It's given me quite a few surreal moments. We sat when we went to this hall at the United Nations to do that particular event, and it was myself and Edward James Olmos and Mary and. Whoopi Goldberg was the moderator, and there were reps from the UN there, and we sat up on this dais, and in front of all the people that were sitting out in the audience, this is one of the halls where, not the main hall that you see on television for the General Assembly, but it was a hall designed to fit delegates from the UN, and they have name placards in front of all the chairs representing the countries. And when we were there, the name placards were all the names of the 12 colonies. And that's just surreal. I mean, it's like a bizarre moment in your life to realize that you've done something that has this kind of impact and has touched people in such a profound and interesting way. And it's flattering, and I don't quite know what to make of it other than to just be grateful for it.
And Esai, you mentioned there about you're soon to be a father. Has that experience now made you look at some of the issues in Caprica differently? Has it given you a new perspective now?
Has what experience?
The impending fatherhood. Has that made you suddenly look at things in Caprica?
Yes, I was almost, I was hoping, I said, wow, I wish I could have been a dad beforehand, but, it's only going to make my understanding of parenting much more specific. Everyone always says, even to this day, you have no idea what you're in for. And they all say, no, it's beautiful, it's lovely, but you have no idea. So basically try to get as much sleep as possible now. But ultimately, I'm a little long in the tooth compared to most of my mates that have, already had children. I'm closing in on 50. So I'm just really glad that I've had a chance to grow up, allegedly, more so than if I were in my 20s. You know, I'm glad that I can offer much more wisdom, I hope the word is, much more tolerance, patience. As you get older, you realize, you know, when you're younger, everything is just like the end of the world. Oh my God. And when you get older, you realize, you know, we can work this out somehow or another. And I think I'm going to be a much better parent because of that. And I can only imagine how much more I'm going to be invested in this character, knowing what it really feels like.
And we have another question for this gentleman here.
Yeah, this is a question to Ron and Esai. How do you decide how long a series goes on for? I know the Star Trek series ran for 7 seasons each. I think a lot of people were saying that Battlestar Galactica ended before they wanted it to end. And I remember I was watching NYPD Blue. I thought it was an outstanding cop series, and that went on for 10 years. So how do you decide how long you want to be in a role for? Is it 2, 3, 4 seasons, or is it your decision? Is it the productions? Who actually decides?
I'm gonna try to filter that down a bit. This was for Ron and myself, but can you clarify just a little more? I heard every other word.
He's asking, how does the decision come down to how long a series like Caprica and Battlestar last? Because other shows he's watched, such as NYPD Blue, have gone on for 10 years. And so how did that affect it? Because I know for Battlestar in particular, you actually said 4 seasons and that's it. So how does that kind of decision come about?
Well, in Battlestar's case, you know, I started the series without a preset idea of how long it was going to run. You know, I just said, okay, this is a series with a built-in ending. Eventually, they're going to find Earth, or not. But there's an end point to this show. So we're going to start it with that idea, and we'll just see how long it takes us to get there. And it wasn't until about the 2nd season that I started seriously thinking, well, maybe there's 3 or 4 seasons left, or a couple of years. But as we got into the 3rd season, and particularly by the end of the 3rd season, I just felt as a writer that the show had entered the 3rd act, in that, you know, it just felt like the storyline was reaching a conclusion. You know, we had revealed most of the Cylons. Kara Thrace had showed up. She had died and come back, and she said, I'd been to Earth, I'm going to take you there. And it just felt like we're moving into the final chapters, and let's wrap it up. Let's say that the next year is going to be the last season, and let's just do it. And let's get off the stage while everyone still loves us, and you know, you always want to leave them wanting more, and let's just go out strong and with our heads held high. And it just became that was what I said, and we just decided to do that. That said, it was very hard to end the show. It was, you know, there was a lot of love in the cast and the crew and all of us, and we all really enjoyed doing the show. But by the end, I think it was the right decision. It felt like the story had taken us that far, that fast, and you had to sort of be true to what the story was. In Caprica, I'm sort of at the same place at the beginning. You know, I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know how far this story should go or how fast. We'll figure that out as over the next year or two, probably. Looking ahead from where Caprica is to the beginning of the Battlestar miniseries, I could pick out probably a half dozen points that could be plausible endings for the show. And which one of those is correct, or if it's a point I haven't even thought of yet, you know, we'll see. It's just it's too early right now to sort of decide where that's going to end up.
And we have a question here from a young lady.
Hi, I was just wondering, there's something I've always been curious about. Why is the paper not square? Why has it got the corners cut off?
What the frack did she say?
What? She's always wondered why the paper is not square and why the corners are cut off. She's
always...
Why
are the corners cut off?
Why are the corners cut off?
Of the paper, yeah.
We don't want to be square.
That was something that got established on the miniseries, almost as an afterthought. And I think the art department and the director, Michael Reimer, were looking for just sort of a visual signature for how they did some things aesthetically differently in the Battlestar world. And so they started clipping off the corners, and then it became somebody's job in the crew to go around and keep clipping corners, and it just became this sort of aesthetic that, you know, they don't like right angles in the Battlestar universe for some reason.
It's kind of like when we drive around here and go, why is everybody on the wrong side of the street?
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
I know, we're on the wrong side.
And we have a question from a young lady at the back.
Hi, I have a question for Ron. The seventh Cylon that was never revealed in the original Battlestar Galactica series, will there be any light shed on his character at all in the Caprica series?
Were there any Cylons that were not revealed in the Battlestar series that will be revealed in Caprica?
Yeah.
There's no plans for that. You know, we pretty much revealed the 12 Cylons.
The seventh one, Daniel.
Daniel. No, the Daniel backstory took place long before Caprica has even really happened. You know, in sort of the cosmology of the show, that particular backstory with the final five, what became known as the final five Cylons, and Daniel and the creation of all those of the other Cylons back on their version of Earth, took place thousands of years really before the events of Caprica. So I don't think we'll actually be seeing Daniel in this series, no.
Okay, we have a question from a young lady here.
Hi, I was wondering about the music to Battlestar and Caprica and how much communication you have, if you like, or influence in deciding themes and how they link to the ideas and themes within the film itself.
Well, Bear McCreary does the music and did the music for the Battlestar series as well as Caprica, and we pretty much just kind of leave Bear alone. You know, Bear is really, really talented, has done outstanding work. There's always, when an episode is first cut together in the editing room, the editor will lay down what's called a temp track, and the temp track has music, existing music that Bear's already done, and then just pieces of music that the editor puts on just so you can watch it and hear it with some music cues. And so when the cut is delivered to Bear, he's got sort of a general idea of what we the producers are looking for from the soundtrack. But Bear is free to kind of do whatever he wants thematically, and there's always what's called a spotting session where you sit with the composer, the editor, and the other producers, and you kind of go through the whole episode, and you talk, and you say, Bear will say, well, this cue doesn't feel right, or I'd rather have silence here, or I'm looking for a big orchestral thing, and there's a conversation that sort of happens, and then Bear goes off and does his magic and delivers a brilliant soundtrack.
I have a question from a young man here.
It's to Esai. Have you took anything off the set to keep for yourself to remind you of the series so far? Like any small objects, or can't you say in front of Ron?
Wait, is there what that I do to what?
Is there anything you've taken off the set that maybe you shouldn't? He said maybe you shouldn't say this in front of Ron, but is there anything you've taken off the set so far as a small memento?
Something I've stolen from the set. That's a good one. I wanted to take the lighter, the famous lighter, but I thought, no, we might need it for next season, and I end up losing it. Just great memories. Just honestly, that hat is also the one hat that fits me. I didn't think of myself as a hat person. I still don't, but that hat suits me. What did I take? Did I take anything? I'm sure there was something, but I can't think of it, or I couldn't admit to it right now. No, just great memories.
We've got time for one more question after this one from me, but just quickly before we get to that one, what is it like then, because both of you have come, Ron, you've had the experience with Battlestar, you've now got the experience with Caprica, and Esai, this probably is a new thing for you. The sci-fi fans are extraordinarily passionate about what they love. What is this like for you guys to encounter when you actually do go out to meet the people?
Well, number one, it's encouraging to know that, all's not lost, that you can make intelligent, entertaining, fair, and people will not only get it, they will actually riff on it. They will come up with things that you had not even thought of. I mean, I think, you guys feel the same way, where you guys are almost more invested than we are. We're into, as an actor, I'm into my character, or my family storylines and stuff. You guys absorb this in a way, and just it's like you are ground that we plant these seeds of characters, and you grow them yourselves with your own imagination and your own compassion. So it's good to know that we can't phone it in, because you know a phony when you see it. So we'll hear from you if we're not in it as much, at least on a comparable level to where you guys are. So it helps us keep the bar high and stay on our toes to know that you guys are invested.
Okay, we are next. And
intelligently invested.
We're going to have two more. I'll extend the questions. We got this young gentleman here.
One comment I'd like to say is that good science fiction tends to be good because it's talking about the present day rather than the future, and Battlestar Galactica series was able to reflect that. It's a question for Mr. Moore. I was wondering which writers would influence you, or have influenced you in your script writing.
What other writers influenced me?
Science fiction, you mean? Or
science fiction writers or writers?
Yeah, writers, but particularly science fiction writers.
I probably was influenced a lot, most by Hemingway. You know, I appreciate his work and his prose and his sort of the elegance of his sentence structure and his choice of words, and sort of there's a very direct, very masculine tone that comes out of Hemingway's work that I find very interesting. I don't really write like that. That's not really my particular style, but I find it very provocative, and it sticks with me probably more than that. And Shakespeare, like everybody, because the love of the language and the intricacy of the plot and the sort of the basics of dramaturgy and whatnot. In science fiction terms, Harlan Ellison is a huge influence, and just the breadth of his imagination and the passion of his words. And it's hard to read Harlan's words without really being assaulted by sort of what he's saying in a very loud and direct voice. And I have tremendous respect for that kind of writing.
And we got one more question for this gentleman here.
Question for Esai. To what extent, if any, do you have an input into the character of Joseph?
Say once again.
To what extent do you have an input, if you have an input, into the character of Joseph?
To what extent am I like?
In the actual writing, do you have an input to the character?
It's so funny. I think my character benefits from the kind of the Godfather-y storyline, whereas other actors are much more vociferous or vocal about their scenes, and they will, add or ask for adjustments here and there. I try to make it work whatever I can, but little things, they're always open. The director on the day, or the showrunner, producers on. There are things like in morning sequences, we come up with our own gestures because we want it to be specific. So the men kiss each other in the Torans, but we put the ladies' hands to our head because we won't kiss the ladies like we, just certain things that remind us of old world, but that have different twists. There are times where if it doesn't feel right flowing out, we'll make subtle adjustments, but I have to say I'm very lucky in the way they've written my character, or I'm just not as smart an editor. I come from a different line. It's so strange. There was a time where I thought you had to fight to get it right, and I would go, this doesn't work, this doesn't feel right, not on this show, but in other experiences, and then I'd change it, and then I'd work, and it still didn't work, and then I'd change it again, and then I'd change it, and then I'd come all the way back to the original, and I realized, I like that better. So all that time I wasted fighting, I try to avoid by making what the writer has given us work. And if it still doesn't work, then we ask for some sort of adjustment. Things that are redundant. I say, didn't we make this point over here? Do I have to say that again and again? Things like that. But they're very open. I mean, I have to say, the difference was, and I'm sorry if I didn't answer the other gentleman's thing about NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue, I joined it as a well-oiled machine, and they do not take kindly to switching words here and there. You know, it's Bochco, and, you know, it was the people that wrote under him. It's a science. It's a police procedural show. There's a cadence, and they work that cadence in, and they're very specific. I think we're lucky because it's the first season of a show of a world that's not as known, so we have freedom to say what we like. But they'll shoot it down if it doesn't make sense, and we're okay with that. But at least we have a voice. We can express ourselves. It's not as cut and dry.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is all the time we have for this afternoon. Please give a massive round of applause to Ron D. Moore and Esai Morales. We'll be